In 1861, the United States of America was 85 years old. It had survived a revolution. It had fought Britain twice. It had expanded across an entire continent. And it was about to destroy itself. Not from the outside, from within. Brother against brother isn't just a phrase people use to describe the Civil War. It was literally true. Families split down the middle, one son in blue, one in gray. Fathers who never spoke to their children again. Friends who met each other on opposite sides of a battlefield. Over 600,000 Americans would die in the next 4 years. More than in every other American war combined before or since. And the question at the center of all of it wasn't really about states' rights or tariffs or political power. It was about whether one human being had the right to own another. That's where this story starts. And it starts uglier than most people want to admit. Here's something the history books gloss over. The Founding Fathers knew slavery was wrong. Many of them said so privately in letters in their journals. Thomas Jefferson called it a moral and political depravity. George Washington expressed hope it would gradually disappear. And then they left it in the Constitution anyway, because the Southern states wouldn't sign without it. And without the South, there was no country. So they made a compromise, the first of many, and kicked the problem down the road. For 80 years, America kept kicking it. Every decade brought a new compromise. The Missouri Compromise of 1820. The Compromise of 1850. Each one was supposed to settle the question. Each one just delayed it. Because here's the truth. You cannot compromise on whether a person is a person. Eventually, that question demands an answer. To understand why the South fought so hard, you have to understand what slavery actually meant economically. By 1860, there were nearly 4 million enslaved people in the American South. Their combined economic value, what slaveholders claimed they were worth, was roughly $3.5 billion. In today's money, that's over $100 billion. Cotton was king. Southern plantations supplied 75% of the world's cotton. British textile mills ran on it. Northern banks financed it. The entire American economy was tangled up in it. Slaveholders weren't just defending a way of life. They were defending the source of their wealth, their power, and their identity. And they knew that if slavery didn't expand into new territories, it would eventually die. The math would catch up. So expansion wasn't optional for them. It was survival. In 1859, a man named John Brown decided that if the government wouldn't end slavery, he would do it himself. He led a raid on a federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. His plan was to seize weapons, arm enslaved people, and spark a massive uprising across the South. It failed completely. Within 36 hours, Brown was captured by a force led by Colonel Robert E. Lee. He was tried for treason and hanged. But what happened next is what mattered. In the North, millions of people called Brown a martyr, a hero, a man who died for justice. In the South, that reaction confirmed every fear they'd had. The North didn't just want to limit slavery. They wanted to destroy the entire Southern way of life, and they were willing to celebrate violence to do it. The country hadn't split yet, but the trust was already gone. In November 1860, Abraham Lincoln won the presidency. He didn't win a single Southern state. Not one. His name wasn't even on the ballot in most of them. And yet he won. For the South, this was the moment. A president elected entirely by the North with no mandate from them, no accountability to them, and views on slavery they considered an existential threat. South Carolina seceded from the Union in December 1860. Before Lincoln even took office, Mississippi followed. Then Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas. By February 1861, 7 states had left the Union and formed the Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as their president. For more would follow once the shooting started. Lincoln hadn't done a single thing yet as president. He hadn't passed a law, hadn't issued an order, hadn't touched slavery where it already existed. It didn't matter. The South wasn't reacting to what Lincoln had done. They were reacting to what they were certain he would do. Understand what Abraham Lincoln inherited on March 4, 1861. 7 states had already left. The U.S. Army had fewer than 17,000 soldiers, many of whom were resigning to join the Confederacy. The capital, Washington, D.C., was surrounded on three sides by slaveholding territory. His cabinet was full of men who thought they were smarter than him. Half the country thought he was a backwoods nobody who had no business being president. And he had one job: hold the country together. Lincoln didn't want a war. He made that clear in his inaugural address. He had no intention of touching slavery where it existed. He just needed the South to come back. They didn't come back. On April 12, 1861, Confederate artillery opened fire on Fort Sumter, a Union garrison in South Carolina. For 34 hours, the fort was bombarded. The Union garrison, badly outnumbered and out of supplies, surrendered. The war had begun, and both sides thought it would be over in 90 days. The North's confidence was almost insulting. Washington, D.C. was buzzing. Young men were enlisting in droves, afraid the war would end before they got a chance to fight. Politicians were predicting a quick march south, a swift defeat of the rebellion, and everyone home before Christmas. The South was just as confident, but for different reasons. They weren't trying to conquer the North. They just had to not lose, hold their ground long enough that the North got tired, that European powers stepped in, that the political will in Washington collapsed. On July 21, 1861, the two armies met for the first time in a major engagement, outside a small Virginia town, near a creek called Bull Run. Washington socialites packed carriages with food and wine and rode out to watch. This would be the battle that ended the rebellion. A perfect Sunday spectacle. The battle started well for the Union. Then the South held, then pushed back. A Confederate general named Thomas Jackson stood his ground so firmly that another officer pointed him out to rallying troops. There stands Jackson like a stone wall. The name stuck. The Union line buckled. Then it broke. And what followed wasn't a retreat, it was a panic. Union soldiers threw down their rifles and ran. Congressmen who'd come to watch scrambled to get their carriages out of the way of fleeing soldiers. The road back to Washington was chaos. Men, horses, wagons, and terrified civilians all tangled together. By the time it was over, the Union had lost nearly 3,000 men. The Confederates had won the field. The picnic crowd made it back to Washington, shaken, silent, and suddenly understanding something they hadn't that morning. This was not going to be over in 90 days. This was going to be the worst thing America had ever seen. Lincoln sat alone in the White House that night. He didn't sleep, because he understood, better than anyone, what Bull Run meant. The South had real soldiers, real generals, real resolve. And the Union, if it was going to win this war, needed to become something it had never been before. What came next was 4 years of suffering on a scale Americans had never imagined and have never experienced since. Gettysburg, Antietam, the Emancipation Proclamation, Sherman's March, and a president who held the entire thing together through sheer will, until the night someone put a bullet in his head. That's part 2, and it's where this story gets truly unforgettable.